Okay, so in video 1, we learned how to save photos onto our computer properly, how to import them into Lightroom Classic, and how to narrow down our selections from 40 photographs that we may have taken in the field to the 5 or 6 we want to use in our blog post. Today, I'll go over the Lightroom Classic interface, and then I'll show you a few basic edits you may want to do to the photographs, and then the very exciting part of exporting them so that they're ready to put onto your blog page. The focus today really is on editing photographs that we've imported from our smartphone. So they're JPEG photographs, which means a smaller file that doesn't have a lot of data in it. So we can't really do extensive editing in Lightroom on a JPEG file. We can do basic edits as opposed to RAW files. So people who are using SLR cameras, you can take raw photographs, and import them into your computer as raw files, and then you can go a little deeper with your edits, which isn't really recommended anyway because this is photojournalism and we want to keep the edits as minimal as possible. So let's first take a very quick look at the workspace here. You will see that on the 4 edges of the screen there are arrows, and these arrows will toggle these panels on the screen. So if I toggle them off, we can't see, we can just see the photograph, and then we can toggle them back on just by pressing the arrow. That's useful to know because sometimes you lose your panels and you can't find them. Well, there you go. On the left hand side, this panel is I use it mostly to see the history of the edits I make on the photo. So you'll see if I make an adjustment here, it's going to keep track of every change I make, and that's just handy to know, to see how many edits I've made, and if I want to go back and make changes, I can use the history panel. On the bottom, we've got the film strip, so those are our photos. This has been filtered down to our rated photographs. So in the previous video, the photos we liked, we gave it a 5-star rating, and then we used this menu to filter all of the photos that had been rated, and there they are. And then on the right hand side, we've got the edit panels. Now there is a lot you can do to a photograph to edit it, and we will not be using about 95% of these tools. We're going to focus on what is in the basic edit panel, and then I'd also like you to take a look at the histogram of your photos. And we don't really have to get into this too deep, but this tells us about light and exposure in the photo, and all you really need to know for right now is that so long as all of this data is inside this box, you are okay. But if these are peeking out of the box, or this is stretched on either side, then your image hasn't been properly exposed. And for people who are working in raw file formats, you can adjust any of this using this panel, but if your data is off the charts, you can't adjust data that doesn't exist. So just something to pay attention to, and definitely something you should do a YouTube search on and learn a little bit more about if you are serious about learning about photography. For now, let's focus on this basic adjustment panel. As photojournalists, the only thing we really want to alter is the exposure, the contrast, and maybe a little bit of color. You can adjust the white balance. So white balance tells us, is basically what is white in the image. Sometimes you'll import a photograph and it'll look like this. So you'll want to move this slider so that your whites look a little bit more white. But you really want to stay true to the environment you were taking a photo in. So it was a fall day, which, maybe it would be nice to punch up the oranges to make it look a little bit more autumnal, but that's not being honest. This is what it looked like when I took the photo. So I will leave that there. Now, exposure, this is a pretty well exposed photograph. We've got some nice shadows here, which give us some depth. Winston's face is a little bit in shadow, so I would maybe try to lift that a tiny bit. If I use the exposure slider, it will adjust the exposure for the entire photograph. So it'll bring up the shadows, it'll bring up the highlights, which are the bright areas of the photo, and it will bring up the midtones. So, sometimes you do want to give a little boost to the exposure because it will be a bit dark. And then if you boost the exposure, sometimes it fades the photo a bit. Contrast can help with that. So contrast is the difference between light and dark in the photo. So by boosting the contrast, you can get a little bit of detail back in. That said, if you boost it too much, it starts to look really fake. So a little bit of contrast goes a long way. Highlights and shadows. So highlights, if you lift the highlights, that'll make the bright parts of the photo brighter, or it will make them darker. And shadows, you can brighten your shadows or darken your shadows. And then finally, we'll skip these. I don't really think that you will need to make, I don't think these will make much difference in your JPEG files. That is just image sharpening. But here we've got vibrance and saturation. And this will boost the color in your photo, but there's a big difference between these two. And the first difference is that saturation will boost all of the colors in the photo. So we've all seen photos where the vibrant or the saturation is just too much. It looks really fake. I never use saturation. I will though use vibrance, and vibrance will bring up the muted colors in the photo. So if, let's say, some of the greens in the photo are a bit muted, if I bring that up, it'll just kind of add a punch of color there. Again, gentle touch, because too much looks fake and gross, and we don't want that. So that's it for adjustments to this photograph. Really, you should be making minimal edits, okay? The biggest, I think, changes you could be making are to the cropping and framing of the photo. So Winston is the subject. He's not optimally placed in the photo. We're not really following rule of thirds here. So I can use my crop tool, which is right here. I click on that to reframe him. Now, all of the photos we're going to use for our blog posts are going to be a 4:3 or 4:3 ratio. 1024 by 768, right, is the file size we want, or the dimensions we want. So I click on crop, I click here, and then I choose the 4:3 ratio. And then it doesn't matter what I do, it's always going to stay as a 4:3. So I'm just going to move Winston, and I think it might be a little bit too far off to the side there, but I think this should be good, and boom, there we go. So we're done that photograph. Oh, one other thing in the crop tool to straighten the image, when you put your the mouse inside, you can move the photo around in the crop box. If you put your mouse outside of the box, you can rotate it. And you want to straighten the photo so the horizon is straight. So you have to choose what your horizon point is going to be, and a little bit of a horizon adjustment really can make or break a photograph. So there we go. That's good. One last thing I want to show you before we do our export is on this vertical photo. So let's say, oops, I took this photo vertically, but I need to use it for my blog post. Very easy to do. Turn off that audio. Okay, so click on your crop tool here, and then we want to make sure that we are on the 4:3 ratio. And see how the box is vertically oriented? It does that automatically because the photo is vertically oriented. If I press the letter X on my keyboard, so press X, it will turn the box. and then it is horizontally oriented. And boom, there we go. Maybe a little exposure boost here, and then I think that's great. So now exporting the photos for the blog. I'm going to select all of the photos. So I click number 1, I hold down my shift key and press number 7, and it selects all of the photos. I'll go to File, Export. Now I want to export these photos to the Winston folder that I created. So I'm going to choose the Winston. So I'm going to go to my 2022 file folder, Winston Park, and yeah, I've got a folder here called Winston Export. So I've already exported this in a previous video that I tried to record. So I'm just going to choose this Winston Park. So this is where everything is. I choose, and then I'm going to put my photos in a subfolder, and it's going to be called Winston Exports November 12th. And then I am going to scroll down and make sure that my images are exported at the proper size. So I think it's okay to drop the quality of the photo to 90%. And then you want to click this button, resize to fit, and we're going to make sure the long edge of all of our photographs are 1024. And then the resolution we're going to set at 72. So that's just generally accepted screen resolution. I always boost it because I'm paranoid I'm going to lose quality, but I don't think we will. This is best practice, really, 72 pixels per inch. And you can, if you want, click this sharpen for screen, and then it will sharpen the images so that they do look nice on the screen. And then that's it. I click export. You look up here in the top left hand side, it's exported my 7 files. Now when I go to my photo file, 2022 Winston Park, I scroll down, we see we've got my Winston Exports November 12th. Double click, and there they are. And you're all set to put those into your blog post. Very, very efficient process if you can learn it. So I hope that was helpful.